Greetings, chess fans. We are continuing my GM Neiksans Bootcamps video series, and this is the episode number 49. And based on your votes that I posted on my YouTube page a couple of days ago, the topic was chosen the pawn play. And why pawn play is important in chess? Because no matter what kind of openings you play, just play Sicilian Najdorf, you play e4, e5, you like kings in an attack, you're a big fan of the Dutch defense, you still have to master the pawn play. And in a nutshell, like very much simplifying, what is the pawn play all about? You have to find a way to use your pawns properly to generate targets where to send in your pieces. That's it. So pawns are the least valuable things that you get from the beginning of the game, and that's why you have to be able to use them properly so that you accomplish what you want. And speaking about pawn play in general on my YouTube channel, this is not the first time when I'm talking about the importance of the pawns. I already have made several boot camps, and after this video, I strongly recommend you watch them because when we talk about the pawn plays, we can divide, like it's a huge topic, but we can divide it in pawn structures. We can divide it in some general principles and then also the endgames. When it comes to the pawn structures, I have done the following boot camps. I have done the Carlsbad structure. I'm going to obviously leave the link in the description. I have done the Marazzi bind. I have done the IQP from the attackers and from the defenders' perspective. So 4 boot camps already. What I'm missing still up to this point is the hanging pawns. I will definitely make it at some point. And also I'm thinking Stonewall, probably something I would have to cover not only from the Dutch Stonewall's perspective, but also the London Trompowsky, where you basically get the same structure. When it comes to the endgames, I have 2 boot camps that cover the pawns. They are pawn endgames and essential endgames, even though in the essential endgames, a couple of examples, they pretty much mirror from the pawn endgames. So that's why in this boot camp, we are going to talk about general stuff, strategy. And the way I see it, I mean, I try to categorize it in a way so that it makes sense. I cannot read a million books on the pawn play, so this is my opinion, and no one else says. But normally, I was splitting the pawn play in 3 parts. So I would make the first part the regular pawn play, which is probably a bit vague. The second part is side pawn pushes, and the third part is pawns in front of the king. And by the way, when you're watching, when you just heard this thing that I just said, side pawn pushes, you're thinking, wait a second, this is something I mentioned in my space advantage bootcamp. Did I not? Yes. I mean, you're not going to be surprised how everything in chess is super interlinked. Yeah. So learning to use the pawn play, you definitely will also have to master the space advantage because these things are like really close to each other. The plan for this bootcamp is as follows. Let me count how many parts do I have. So I have the first part, which is the pawn principles. I'm going to show you some examples, explain why I think pawn play is important, and I think you're going to agree with me. The second part will be to break in the center or to push in the flank. Then I will explain on every single occasion why I think this is the right way to continue. The third thing is going to be using the pawns at the flank when the center is locked. And the fourth part is going to be using the pawns at the flank where your king is when the center is open. So basically what I did, I split my 3 original, the way I'm splitting the pawn play, the regular pawn play, side pawn pushes, and pawns in front of the king, like in like 5 whatever parts. How many parts was it actually? I forgot to count. Like actually, I think it was 4. All right. So let's start with something. And I would like to show you like a very basic example, which can arise in, let's say, the Sicilian Sveshnikov, but there could be many openings. Let's say bishop b5, g6, takes, takes. This is one of the trendy lines, the Sicilian Rossolimo. White plays rook e1. And white expects that, after knight f6, white's going to play e5, knight e5, white's going to play d4, and actually in this position, white is really great. But suddenly in this position, black plays queen c7, which is quite a rare move. And if I'm not terribly mistaken, I had to check this. I forgot. I think this is what I'm recommending in my boot camp, the Sicilian Sveshnikov. So the idea is that black wants to close the center and bring out the pieces. Like black wants to play e5, d6, knight e7, show castle, and f5. And let me show you what happens if white is unaware of what black wants to do, and white just plays normal chess. Let's say white plays knight c3, e5, white plays d3, we play d6. Now white is thinking, okay, bishop g4 is a problem. I'm going to play h3. Black plays knight e7. And now white's like thinking, okay, now what? Now what? I have two knights, and they say that the knights in a closed position, they operate better than the two bishops. So that's why black should keep the position closed, right? So let's say black plays something like b3. He plays bishop b2. He doesn't really know why he's doing this. Black plays f5. White again doesn't know what to do. Queen e2, h6, rook d1. Okay, everything is developed. g5. And the result is what is much worse. Much worse. So what went wrong? Because white was seemingly doing everything as he is supposed to with the two knights, right? But there's a very clear element missing in his game, and that is the pawn play. And which part gets really confusing in chess is that very often in chess there's two conflicting rules. Because when we get this position earlier, you would think, wait, if I open up the position, I am opening up the position for his bishops, right? So black benefits from this. However, I think that the pawn play has a bit of a higher hierarchy than worrying about the two bishops. And I think that you should really not worry about the supposed bishop pair until the position is really, really open. And I think in terms of the priority, this pawn play is so much more important. So white has to do something else. I think the move actually here was knight a3. Now it kind of rings a bell, but even something like e5, forcing black's hand to play either f6 or d6, opening up the position so that he knows where to put his pieces, it makes more sense. Because check out what happens. From the white's perspective, if white is not using any pawns, he doesn't know where to place the pieces. I mean, the knight on c3, knight on f3, okay, they're kind of standing well. But let's say, where do you put the bishop on c1? Where is it supposed to go? Is it supposed to go to e3, to g5, d2? And I think that you want to avoid such positions when you don't know where to place your pieces. And that's why it's so important that from the very early moves, you learn to use your pawn play properly. All right, let me show you another example. Again, it comes from the opening phase. By the way, in the bootcamp, I will be using mostly my games. I hope you can forgive me. Of course, I could have researched Magnus, or right now the trendy name is Javoki Sindarov's games, but I know my game's a bit better than their games, so I think I'll be able to explain the concept quite clearly. So this is one of my games that I played several years ago. It was a rapid game, doesn't really matter. I played with black. My opponent played the English opening, by the way, pretty trendy line. And I talked about this in the English opening bootcamp. So white played e3, bishop b4, queen c2, takes and takes. So we have a position where black has two knights. Black has no weaknesses. White just willingly doubled his pawns, but white has the bishop pair. So you're probably asking yourself why white is doing this. Well, what white wants to do, White wants you to squeeze. White wants to make sure that black in this position has no pawn play. So that's why, for example, if white will play bishop e2, white wants to play something like a short castle, d4, maybe bishop e3, to have some sort of center backed by two bishops. Again, these double pawns. Listen, in the grand scheme of things, I think I will have this chance to mention this more than once. The double pawns, triple pawns, isolated pawns, in the grand scheme of things, they do not matter. What matters is the big things, the space advantage, the initiative, the center, safe king, I suppose. So, like, these weak pawns do not really matter. But again, do not get me wrong. The pawn play is super, super important. So the pawn play I'm talking about, in general, the way how you use the pawns. All right. So here we need some kind of a pawn play. And I think that it's a good idea that you would ask yourself, where can I initiate something? Otherwise, you're going to get a position where you'll be shuffling pieces, which is really bad. You don't want to play like h6, rook e8, bishop d7, queen d7, rook d8, like in the previous example, because things will get bad. And once you see that there might be a break at the king side with a 5, you're thinking how to prepare it. So that's why here knight h5 comes into play. And here knight takes on e5, I think it fails because of knight e5, bishop h5, and queen g5. And suddenly white's position is really dangerous. And if white plays something like g3, we play f5, white plays knight h4, suddenly he hits the knight on h5 with the bishop, also targets the pawn on f5. After knight f4, suddenly black is really doing really well. For example, takes, 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 queen f6. It's very dangerous for white to play g4 because the king is weak, and already here I think that if somebody can play for the privileges, it's black. Again, as you can see, because of this f5 push, suddenly you know what to do. You know that you're going to have this play at the f file. So in this particular game, black played the g3, which is quite a trendy move, and it pretty much slows down black's idea to play f5. Because now we're thinking, okay, how do I play f5? I mean, I could play, of course, knight e8, but why would I make my knight to d8 look bad just because I want to push f5? And what if white just plays knight h4? Yeah, for example, let's say white plays knight h4, g6 creates multiple weaknesses in your king's position, which is not looking really great. And what, knight e7, I suppose? But also, at any given time, you have to ask yourself at real time, do you like your position? Does your position make any sense? Yeah, I'm looking at this and I just do not like what on earth black is doing here with the knight on e8, knight on e7. So instead, of course, you could be thinking that perhaps h6 is a move to prepare knight h7, then play f5. White plays here. Let's say we play here, and there's knight h4. Again, f5 is not a threat. Black plays here, short castle, f5, takes, and suddenly black cannot really take on f5 because there's going to be a check here and some funny checkmate on g6. So it's not so simple for black to initiate this pawn play, and that's why this g3 is so trendy. However, don't despair. When you look at the position more closely, you think, okay. I mean, f5 maybe is a very traditional way to play because I think we're going to talk about this again several times in the bootcamp. The pawn chain, the structure of your pawns, it very often like literally shows you the direction where you have to play. Like here it basically indicates you have to play at the king side, which was true with the white bishop on e2, but here there's a different scenario. And I think it's a good idea that you ask yourself what changes in white's position compared to the previous position. So he's about to play bishop g2. So what changes? If you want to figure it out, you can pause the video, obviously. But if you think you're ready, I think you are going to notice that white is loosening up his control at the queen side. Meaning this bishop no longer will control this diagonal. So it's like, it's always the same principle. You close some doors and you open always new ones. And what I'm thinking about, how about we initiate pawn play at the queen side? a6. And I know what you're thinking. You're like, wait. I am trading his double pawns. There's no way this is good. Remember what I told you? These double pawns, isolated pawns, in the grand scheme of things, it does not matter. What really is more important is your pawn play so that you know where to place your pieces. So let's say here after a6, white plays a4, super logical, trying to stop b5. And you're thinking, yeah, but now if I push b5, I'm going to trade his weak pawns. Yes, you are going to trade his shattered pawns, but also at the same time, you will open up the queen side. You're going to know where to put your pieces. So we can play bishop d7, hint at b5. Let's say white plays something like d3. Knight e7, preparing to play b5. And if white goes here, b5, takes, and black is just fine. The queen side is open. Okay, white has this supposed bishop pair on g2 and c1. But what does it matter? I mean, the position is still closed, and at least now you know where to put your rook. Here, it's going to go to b8. You know what to do with the bishop here on b5. It's targeting the pawn. You might know what to do with this knight. Maybe it's going to go to c5. Suddenly, you know where your pieces are going. Let's say your opponent decides to stop that, and he plays instead a5, trying to take on b6 en passant. We play b5 anyway. He takes on b6 en passant. Yes, it's a bit risky. The pawn on d6 is loose, but again, you're opening up the queen side. Let's say here, queen c7, here, b5, takes, and black is fine. Completely fine. And for white, the pawn on c3 is a target. The bishop can go to c6 potentially, maybe e6. You can put one rook to c8, target a pawn on c3. And again, white's bishop pair, at the moment, it doesn't feel. So I hope you understand me correctly about the bishops, right? I think that, again, this pawn play is way more important to give space for your pieces and targets than worrying about a supposed supreme bishop pair that's going to happen at some point in the future. All right. So, yeah, by the way, in the game, this is how it concluded. White play bishop b6. Bishop b6, d3, b5. Takes. Show castle, h6, d4, bishop c4. And suddenly black knew where to place all of his pieces. There's some targets at the queen side. The pawn on a2 is weak. And white's bishop pair, to be honest, doesn't really matter. All right, let's move on. Let me show you the next example. And this is one of my games that I played in the French League a couple of years ago. No, I think actually last year, against another grandmaster. So I'm playing from the white's perspective. I'm slightly better because there's some pressure against the pawn on d5, but black ultimately is very solid. So what should we do? And you know, one of the common things that very often happens, especially at the club level, unfortunately, players think that if there's an open file, like for example, there's one open C file, all the heavy pieces have to disappear at the C file. There's no such rule. I think the rule is that you should control the open files, but you don't have to trade both rooks and the queen, if you can, at this only file. I think the more important question, what you could ask yourself, how important is the C file at all? Is it important? I don't think it's really important here at all. So, we need some kind of a pawn play. What can we do? And now that we're looking at this position, it becomes quite apparent that we have three healthy pawns at the king side. And that's why I think it makes sense to generate some targets at the king side. But how to do it? And I know what you're thinking, because this was the suggestion from one of my students. The first suggestion here was play f4, which makes sense. White is threatening to play f5, push back the bishop, and win the pawn on d5 outright. But you know, this immediately triggers to me some kind of negative response. Or maybe there's even nothing wrong with f4. Why I do not like f4? Because there's one principle of pushing the pawns. If you push them too far, they're leaving weaknesses behind. Meaning, if, for example, in this case, you move the pawn by 2 squares, white is irreversibly weakening d4 square. And even though, like, I'm open to suggestions, chess is a very concrete game, every position requires concrete solution. Here, I just do not think that f4 accomplishes anything because, let's say, f5, bishop d7, the pawn on f5 will be under attack anyway at some point if you decide to win a pawn on d5. So what I recommend is to play f3, activate the king, which obviously is another principle we know from endgames. As soon as you're approaching the endgames, the king becomes somebody that not only you have to protect, it's a full piece that joins the game, and also, as you can see, the pawn on f3 limits the black knight on f6. Black played g5, which was quite smart, because black was trying to create a blockade of my pawns. As you can see, he wants to put all of my pawns on the color of his last square bishop. For example, if I play something like king f2, h5, and let's say whatever, black plays h4, plays knight h5, knight f4, and actually it's black who, because of his pawn play, accomplishes something. Yes, these pawns are quite far advanced from the king, but ultimately the question is, can you exploit it? I don't think so. So that's why here after g5, white plays g4, gaining space. And again, we are touching the subject of the space advantage, fixing the f5 square for the knight on e3, and also taking away the h5 square for the black knight. King f8, king f2. Black doesn't really know what to do because he cannot take on c1, play rook c8 because the pawn on d5 will be dropping. If he plays king e7, there's going to be knight f5. The pawn on h6 could be in trouble. So he plays b6. And here, the big question ultimately is how to proceed. And I think it's a very clear plan. You have to play h4. But when I'm looking at this position, I have myself conflicted feelings because I have a rule normally for these endgames when your opponent has one weakness, but it's not enough for you to capitalize. And the rule is as follows. Always keep a pair of rooks on the board. Always. Never trade both rooks in such endgames. And why this rule is so important? Because if you have to fight with two opponents' rooks, then your king might be a bit in trouble. I mean, again, it really depends on the position, but the king can easily take care of one opponent's rook. I mean, cover the squares and everything. Two rooks, it already might be a bit too much. I'm going to show you that in a moment. So that's why I'm thinking I could trade one pair of rooks, use the other rook to generate targets at the king side. The c-file here is irrelevant. And maybe this rook is going to be able to create these weaknesses. But there's another thing, another layer to think about. If I keep two rooks on the board, I can play for the checkmate. And yes, I know, you're looking at this position, you're thinking, but where's the checkmate? Where's the checkmate? There's no checkmate. Not yet. But when we talk about converting, and this was one of the subjects I talk about in my bootcamp, converting material advantage, it's always very effective to pin in some checkmate threats, some threats against opponent's king. So that's why I'm thinking, can I just ignore the c-file? So my idea is to play rook h1, play h4, open up the h-file, maybe double the rooks, maybe think about at some point use the f5 square for the knight, and generate some threats. But I don't really know if this is so good, because suddenly black becomes very active, the knight on e3 is a bit loose, let's say h4, bishop d7, even if I'm winning a pawn, let's say knight e5, bishop d5, the other rook comes on the second rank. That's what I was telling you. Like this position with one rook on c2, let's say we have these rooks traded. I'm totally going here. There's no risk for me. With two rooks, I don't know. Again, it really depends. So that's why in this game, I followed my rule that I trade pair of rooks. I play rook h1. I want to play h4. Black plays king e7, h4. Now what, right? What I'm doing is I'm using the pawn play and I'm trying to generate some targets. So this is one potential weakness, and this is potentially the second weakness. So we would have to again revisit one of the oldest rules in chess that was basically introduced or formulated by the great Dane Aron Nincevich about 100 years ago, is that when you have in your opponent's position one weakness, you try to create a second weakness, and then you try to press on them at the same time. Let's say one of the left and one of the right, right? And you are just pitchforking them at the same time. And it's very difficult for your opponent to hold it. That's why it's so effective. And what we're trying to do, we're trying to create some kind of a target at the king side, improve the king, improve the king. As you can see, black is completely unable to use the c file because, let's say, a couple of moves ago, he could have played rook c3. Yes, it's a great active rook, but I'll just smoke it out. I'll play king e2, king d2. And if you're thinking I could play b5, I could play b4 to keep the rook on c3 working, but what about the pawn? Oh, sorry, not like this. But what about the pawn on b4? Like this. And at any given moment, you can always play rook c1 if you feel threatened, just trade it. That's why I'm saying this principle that not always when you have an open file, you have to trade both rooks. So in this game, black played rook d8, white improves the king, knight c2, here, 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 rook h5, rook h6, and suddenly black's position is starting to look really shaky. Yeah, so the knight on e8 cannot move. The pawn on d5 is hit. Check here, but ultimately there's no real progress. And I don't think we are going to continue from here. You can check, obviously, all the examples until the very end in the PGN, which, by the way, I will make a separate cell. So if you're interested to get the PGN with more examples, with full notation, annotation, sorry, but full variations and everything, you're going to have to go to my Patreon shop and purchase it there for a symbolic price, but it's not part of the free bootcamp. Yeah. So yeah, I'm going to wrap it up right here. White definitely has a pressure, and this is basically where you have to maneuver a bit, apply some pressure, play some tricks, which is not really part of the bootcamp, but we got here only and because of the pawn play. Let me show you the next example. And you're looking at this and you're like, wait. This looks so similar to the previous position. And you're right. And you're right. And you know, now that we're looking at this position, you're thinking, what kind of knowledge can I apply from the previous example? Because the first and most logical thing, and which is also what Stockfish would tell you, it's going to say double the rooks. Of course, you have an open file. But remember what I told you. The two rooks do not have to disappear at an open file. Because it's not so important. Let's say takes, rook e8. Yes, so we trade the rooks again, takes. And let's say you try to play a 4, top continuation of Stockfish, imprison the bishop. Black retreats, king f2 here, king e3, king e7. And now, finally, Engine catches it up and says, oh, but there's nothing here. Well, yes, it's nothing here. Black's going to play king d6, knight c7, h6, put all the pawns on the dark squares because you have the light square bishop. That's it. You cannot win because of one weakness on d5. You need another. And to create another weakness, what do you need? You need the rook. So that's why the correct continuation is to give up the e-file. I don't think we can keep the rook, to be honest, like thinking about this future checkmate idea. Takes, f3. Again, same pattern, limiting the knight at f6. g4, more space. Don't worry about the 4 square. Do you see how black can exploit it? I do not. If we would have a different position and the black would have the bishop somewhere here, I would never play g4 because it just creates this weakness. I would probably play something careful. But in this position, it's a possibility, and the knight on f6 is starting to feel not great. This is called the game progress, h4. The threat is to play g5 and gain space, weaken the control of the d5 square. Black stops this. And ultimately, our goal is here. Rearrange the pieces, put the knight on e3, and there you go. It's basically the same position. White applies pressure against the pawn on d5. The king side is a bit open. Ideally, I would love to have a second rook, because then we could somehow generate some threats against the opponent's king, but it is what it is. And again, the game continued for a while. Ultimately, what white is trying to do, white is trying to create some targets at the queen side. And this is how the game progressed. And here at this moment, white could have improved the king a bit and try to open up the queen side. With b4, you have an open file. Now, this file, I think it's going to matter because you're going to be the one who is going to control it. H file here doesn't matter at all. And after takes it, you can choose between two ideas, rook b4, apply pressure against the pawn on b6, which I think looks the most reasonable, or c takes on b4, create an outside pass pawn, but kind of leave the pawn on d5 unattended. And again, you could like rearrange the pieces, put like maybe the knight on d4, obviously do not blunder the pawn on a4, and white keeps pressing. It's not winning, but this is the best you can do in these positions. All right, let me show you one more. One more from the basic principles. So this is the position I had myself in one of my rapid games 70 years ago. I'm playing with black. I'm slightly better, but it's not a big deal because white is about to trade off a couple of pieces on d4. So you see the bishop on d4 is hit by the bishop, by the rook. Trade, make a window for the king. Everything's good. And let's say, what happens if you are not aware what's going on? Are you thinking, oh, well, my king has some background issues. I have to make a window for the king, as they say. Let me play h6. And white's going to play like takes, and takes, and takes, and takes. And let's say white's going to play something like f4, and maybe play h3, king h2, and this is how the game is progress, basically. Yeah, let's say here, h3, queen e2, here, takes, takes. It's going to be a draw. But we just walk past something. And by the way, this moment, about h6, I forgot to pull up this game. I had this very nice game against Ari and Tari several years ago in German Bundesliga. Very, very exciting game. And in a very similar fashion, I played h6. And then somebody, I already forgot who was this. This was some 2650 level guy, an elite guy. He came by and he said, Arturs, why do you play h6? I don't understand. But obviously not this position, but very, very similar. And I say, but what's the problem? I'm making the window for the king. And he said, I thought it's a rule that when you have to make the window for the king, you always push the pawns by 2 squares. Because in some future scenarios when maybe there's going to be a race, your pawn is 1 square closer to the queen. It's quite interesting, actually. So, yeah, I hadn't really thought about it like it's even a rule. But in this position, we can kill 2 birds with 1 stone. Number 1, we make a window for the king. And number 2, we are threatening to play h4 and punish his king side. So let's say white does exactly the same. Let's say white plays takes, 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 and f4, which is what happened in the game. Now we play rook c8 because, I mean, f5 is a threat. Yeah, maybe there's going to be some problems. Rook c8, queen e2, and h4. Only because of this move, h5 and not h6, suddenly we have a pawn play. Suddenly we are threatening with h3, target the bishop on g2, and maybe there's some checkmate web. Maybe not. But you know, it's very difficult for white to figure this out. For example, let's say he takes it, h3, here, maybe just a mate. Sorry, not like this. Here. Maybe just a mate. Because you can't play queen e2, takes, takes, there you go, there's the back rank. And maybe white can play something like here. How about I even trade the queens? And I have super active rook. Okay, not the most ideal showcasing of the variation, but you get the point. The pawn on h3 is very annoying. So what white did, white took on h4. I took on f4. The pawn on h4 now is a target. He took it here. I took it here. Now the rook on e1 is loose. The king is a bit in trouble. He played here. Very strong move, rook c2. Obviously, he couldn't take it. There's going to be back rank issues. Here, takes, takes. And I ended up having an extra pawn in an endgame, which I won. So it's a very big difference. I mean, by no means it's forced. But again, check yourself. How is white supposed to meet this h4 threat? So again, we're using the pawn play to generate targets, to create weaknesses, and we are going to know where to place our pieces. And if white plays h4, let's say we play rook c8, this bishop is a bit bad, and if at some point it plays a 4, his king side is a bit weakened, right? So yeah, maybe let me show you one more example from a very recent Bundesliga game. This game I played against Markus Rager, who is a world-class player. He was 2700 elo, like really well-known chess theoretician. I was following my line from the Areti simplified course. I got this position. I'm playing with white. So how should I proceed? And again, we are seeing that we can trade rooks. Like there's two open files, so let's trade it. Let's trade it. There you go. But for what? Why did we do this? And I don't really think that we have to use the open files just to make the rooks disappear. And I think what helps here is that first, we trade a pair of rooks. Why? Because I do not need two rooks on the board. So there you go, one rook disappears. He has to take with the rook, otherwise the pawn on a7 is dropping. And I'm thinking, how can I make some progress? Ideally, I want to get this knight to c5. If I do this, like I'm thinking, there's a maneuver knight g5, knight e4, knight c5. Target this pawn, open up the bishop on g2. But probably he can always trade it on e4. So I'm thinking, no, I want to keep my knight on f3. How about I push back the bishop on f5 and then land the knight on e4? So I'm thinking, how about h3? There's the pawn play. And the trend is to play g4, knight g5, knight e4, not allowing the trade. And if black plays h5, which looks supernatural, the question I would have to you is, how do you plan to get rid of the knight on g5? How? Because if you play f6, it weakens the king for black, makes multiple weaknesses, and the bishop on g7 is pretty bad, right? So that's why here Marcus played a6, which was a bit inaccurate. I think b6 was a bit better. I played knight g5. He went here. I played g4. Again, this is not random. I'm trying to get the knight on c5. I initiate some pawn play. If he takes it, takes. Situation has changed. I have the bishop pair. I have an outside pass pawn. I have something to fight for. And maybe already in this position, I can think about trading the rook because I have generated some targets. And I know what I'm playing on. Meaning I'm playing for this endgame where I have an outside pass pawn at the king's side. You play bishop c8, knight e4, knight e4, knight c5, and I got a pretty nice position. How the game finished, it doesn't really matter. I managed to screw it up in the most unimaginable way, but it's a lovely position. All right, so let's move on to the next part. Let's talk about, let me just a second. Obviously, I'm not going to show you every single example. There's one more. Let's talk about where and how should we know. Should we push in the center or should we go for the flank attack? This game I played, again, 7 years ago. By the way, in the Grenke Open, this huge tournament in Germany. I played there once, this back in 2019, but to be honest, double rounds for me, it was a bit too much. I know it's a really fan favorite open tournament. My opponent was Emil Schmidek, who is right now my teammate in Schachfreunde Berlin. Back then, we were just strangers. So we played out some Hungarian variation, a4, knight a5, bishop a2, c5. All right. By the way, here about this move a4, why not a3? Why we even play a4 at all? I mean, it touches a bit different topic, but ultimately black wants to play knight a5 and eliminate my Latskva bishop. And it's like a rule for some Italian game, some Ruy Lopez. By the way, I talked about this in one of the recent bootcamps, Naroditsky's four knights variation also. You just have to keep an eye on this jump, knight a5. So instead of making a3 the quiet move, how about we play for space at the same time, right? Naturally, black can play a5 would have been a different game, but he played knight a5, he plays c5. All right. Here the question is, after c5, should we go for d4? And you know, I think this is one of the biggest problems at the club level. Everybody loves to go for the breaks in the center. And you know what's my answer to you would be, why? Why would you want to make a break in the center where your opponent's defenses are the toughest? And to explain this concept a bit more clearly, I like to bring up some examples from some team sports. I think I already did this in some other YouTube video from American football or any team sports which involves some physical stuff. Why would you crash through the middle of the field where your opponent's setup, the defensive setup, is very, very tough? It just makes no sense, right? So in this position, let's try to crash the center. Let's say we play c3. We want to play d4. I don't know why we want to do this. Black plays here. He resists. We play d4. We are breaking a rule. Do you know that? Which rule? If you have a lead in development, you should open up the position. If you are not ahead in development, you should keep the position closed. Actually, we are behind in development because we have two queenside pieces underdeveloped and black has just one. And on top of that, black can play c takes, bishop g4, and immediately apply pressure against the pawn on d4. So it's just not great. All right, you're thinking, okay, let me improve d4. This is a common thing in the Italian game. Let me play h3, deal with bishop g4. Black's going to play bishop e6. Okay, fine. Takes. Let's play d4, right? Right now, d4. Again, my question would be, why? Why do we have to play d4? Black's going to take it, and he's going to play d5. Black is opening up the position because we are having a worse development. Let's say takes. So what did we accomplish? Nothing really. And white has to be careful. So that's why I think that when it comes to the breaks in the center, you have to be very, very careful. They have to be prepared and carried out at the right moment. But I do believe it is far more effective try to initiate some pawn play at the flank. And now that we're looking at this position, we're thinking, so where is it? Where is this flank attack? How do I do this? And I know the first thing you might be thinking about is, okay, I have these 3 pawns. The arrow is showing me that I have to play the king side. It's got to be a 4. It's got to be a 4. It's got to be a 4. Really? We are committed to rook e1. And I thought that a 4, it makes sense with the rook on f1. And by the way, we still need to prepare it. Like, we still need to play like h3, I don't know, knight h2, f4, and the rook is on e1 is misplaced, and black is just going to take it. Let's say here, h3, here, bishop e6, takes, f4. Again, we're breaking a million rules. Takes, and what makes this position great? I don't think there's anything great about this. Like d5, well, it's just worse. So where's the pawn play? We play at the queen side. I think at the queen side, black is most vulnerable. White plays knight a3. By the way, I have showed this position so many times to my students. I was thinking, would you want to fight with the d5 square? Like, bishop g5 is a no-brainer. Let's say bishop g5, black plays h6, takes, knight c3, g6, knight e5. Look at this fantastic knight on d5. Well, I'm very much open to this idea, but there's a catch. If you have a pawn play to continue from this moment, because if you do not, let's say you have a beautiful knight on d5 and that's all it is, black's going to play king h7, f5, f4, g5, g4, and go for the attack. So you need to initiate something at the queen side. And yes, you can still try to play c3, b4, and open up the queen side. Would have been a different game. So knight a3, I think it's very effective. h6, stopping some bishop g5 stuff. c3, preparing to play b4. Black deals with this. And again, we have the same possibility to play d4, which I think, again, it's just not going to work in this situation. Bishop d2. We prepare to play b4. Rook e8. And also in such situations, whenever you're planning to carry out something and your opponent makes no effort to stop it, you have to ask yourself, why? Why is he doing this? And I think the simple answer here is that most likely he anticipates your plan. The point is, if you play b4, play according to the plan, Black can organize a counter-strike in the center. And this is one of the most important rules when it comes to the pawn play. I mean, not really the pawn play, but like flank attacks in general, which involve pawn play. Flank attacks, either at the queen side or the king side, most often are best met with a counter-strike in the center. But again, please understand, it's not something that's always going to work. Like it's an actual law or rule. It's more like a guideline. And then it's you who have to decide if in this position it's interesting. And actually here, White can still play knight c2, have an interesting position, and whatever. Yeah, b5, d takes, bishop e6, takes, sort of 3, whatever. Yeah, it's super complicated position. Those who strive in complex lines, this is for you. But I think it's just a mess on the board. So White plays knight c4. I mean, if your idea does not work immediately, I think you can ask yourself, can I improve it? So the problem child was the knight on a3, which is under attack after this d5. Knight c4 is an improvement. Black goes here. Again, b4 is going to be same idea. Takes. Black plays d5, sacks the pawn, but collects the pawn on b4. Black is fine. Yeah. So, okay, this is a bit different subject. But if we try to improve on the idea, we want to play queen b1, protect the bishop at a2, improve the idea to play b4. We, at the same time, should not forget that the opponent can seek some counterplay. And here, suddenly, after bishop g4, I don't know what this is. Black wants to take, play knight h5, play bishop g5, and our king is weak. So that's why prophylactic moves might be necessary. We play h3. We play queen b1. Black is initiating his own pawn play at the queen side. And now if we rush it a bit early, we play b4. Black meets with the pawn play. There's mass trades, takes, 97. Black ultimately is fine. So we play knight e3. At the same time, if we play knight e3, we gotta be very careful of the pawn play of the opponent. And it's like, you don't have to only think about your own ideas, like I'm gonna play b4, I'm gonna play b5, me, my ideas, etc. Ask yourself, what would you do if you're playing as your opponent? And I think the first idea I'm thinking is, how about d5? Now that the knight on c4 is gone, target the opponent e5, how about I make a break in the center? We take it, go back to c4, target the pawn on e5. Now that's a target. And after f6, I mean, this shot just looks too cool. d4, the point is takes. Either it's some rook e6, queen f5 ideas here, or it's some sort of some bishop h6 stuff. Bishop h6, g takes, queen g6, bishop g7, bishop b1, whatever. But I think this rook e6, to be honest, looks very, very promising. We are about to wrap up this game. So Black played b6, which is yeah, I don't know what this move really does. I think any move was better. Maybe b5 was a bit better. We take on e6. And this, by the way, is often a big surprise to the players who do not fully understand the Italian game under Lopez, because you would think, I mean, f takes on e6 is a no-brainer. Like, why would you take on e6? You just gave away the d5 square. This square is gone. This square is gone. Black is super safe, super, solid. But if you think about the position a bit further, if I would ask you, where is Black's pawn play? Because if Black is going to play d5, this pawn on e5 is weak forever. It's never going to be enough protected. So, for example, in this position, b4, takes. Again, maybe Black doesn't have to take, but the idea is to play b5 and then push d4. So let's say Black plays something like whatever, rook c8, b5, takes, knight e7. Again, we might look for the right moment to initiate the pawn break in the center to generate some targets. And I think this might be it. This d4 moment. Not because I think I have to make a break just because I can make a break, but I think I can activate my pieces and I can get to the opponent's king, which on g8 might be a bit loose. Let's say Black takes it once, or maybe with e-pawn first. Takes. The king is a bit weak. Maybe I can play e5, knight g4, go for some checkmate ideas. And if Black takes, the pawn on e6 is loose, and I get access to the c6 weakness. So this is the moment when we play d4. And I hope you understand me correctly. So initially we rejected the idea to play in the center because the circumstances were not right. So we start a flank attack, and then we see what happens. Maybe the circumstances change, and now suddenly we are ready to make a break in the center because we think we are creating weaknesses. We're activating our pieces and at the same time weakening the king. Big change compared to what could have been done in the opening phase. So in this position, that's the best that Black can do. And yeah, these pawns are really nice, solid pawns, but they're not moving forward. Because let's say at some point, here we can even play knight g4, initiate the pawn play, and Black's position becomes really, really unpleasant. So that's why my opponent, who is international master, he took with the rook. And it's also a common understanding, like I already said, between high-class players. Black still wants to play d5, but then he doesn't have to worry about the e5 pawn. Now I play knight e5. He cannot take it. He retreats. Now he wants to take on d5, play knight e7, target the pawn. I play b4, still initiating my pawn play. And now the catch is, if he takes on d5, takes and plays knight e7, I play c4. And this is super, super common at the club level. So many players, for no reason, are afraid of the so-called king's Indian defense, potential attack at the king's side. Yes, I'm talking about like f5, g5, or g6, bishop g7, push those pawns. But they're not going anywhere, right? And also look at this bishop on f8. It's much worse than our Daxwa bishop. And I think the idea here is even to play a5, disrupt his pawn chain at the king's side. Let's say something like this, here, takes, and Black's position just crumbles, which was probably not the most ideal line, but it kind of illustrates the point. And if he plays a5, rook a2, rook b2, rook b5, the pawn on a5 is a weakness, and Black's king's attack is nowhere, and Black is in trouble. So ultimately, this game finished with c takes. Now he wants to take on d5. Take on f6 now. C takes on b5. C takes on b4. Knight e7. Black wants to play d5. We play b5 ourselves. The threat is to meet d5 with takes, queen b5. Again, because of the pawn play, we know where to place our pieces. And after a5, queen b2, stopping e5. Rook c1, bishop e3, knight e2, knight c4. White is just better, and ultimately I won a very fine game. But again, I made it very quickly, like the last part of the game. But as you understand, from the very beginning, it was the pawn play. Like, I played c3, b4, improved the idea of the queenside pawn pushes. The pawn play was the essence of this game. And because of the results, I knew where to position all of my other pieces. All right, let me show you even more complex example. At this game, I played against Etienne Bacro, one of the strongest French grandmasters. At his time, he was a child prodigy. I mean, I remember Etienne. Uh, we played against each other back in 1995. Yeah, there was this World Rapid Youth Championships in Disneyland in Paris. And he was the local star. He became the world champion. I was the guy who lost to him. And I got, I think, the 6th place overall. Missed my chance to get the medal. I only realized it later. Anyway, so I was playing with black. Etienne plays with white. We play this in 2024. And the question is, in this position, where should white play? Should white play in the center? Or should white play in the flank? By the way, also a very important detail, rook a7, rook a8 was played earlier in the game. Black cannot castle queenside. Super, super important detail. What would you do? So you're playing with white. What would you do? And I had a discussion about this with my friend and teammate from the Latvian team, Nikita Meshkov. And he told me that literally 99% of the players, they always go for e4 break. And Etienne also went for this, which is not the best. Because check this out. So he plays e4. His idea was very concrete, which is very easy to understand. He is playing against the opponent's king, my king. I cannot easily castle short side. It's going to be pretty exposed. Let me check this out. So takes. If I play something like a short castle, what about this? Yeah, what about some sacrifice ideas? Knight e6, bishop h7, whatever. It looks super scary. Super, super scary. So I don't think I can castle short. I cannot castle the long side because the rook has moved. So I play knight f6. He took an f6. He played the fancy move, knight g5. So this was his idea all along. And again, that's how it goes. Very often when you have something that distracts you, it looks shiny, you really want to play it. And sometimes you forget to look at the larger picture. And I'm definitely speaking about my own experience as well. So knight g5 is a fancy move. It threatens to expose the black king, and it must be right? I play bishop d5. He played check here. And here I made the wrong choice. I should have played king f8. But, sorry, I should have played king d8 and not king f8. I could not understand what's the difference. So after the correct king d8, the idea is I'm escaping to the queen side. Takes. I play king c7. White has nothing. d5, c5, b4. I just sack the pawn. c4, a very cool move. Takes, king b8. My king is safe, his king is not. The pawn on d5 doesn't matter. Black is totally fine here. So what happened in the game is I messed up. I played king f8. He developed a strong attack. I just didn't realize how strong it is. And ultimately, he made a mistake and allowed me to escape. Again, the rest doesn't really matter. But if you go back to the starting position, is this really the most promising way for white to go for this break? Or we can instead start the flank attack. And when we are looking at this position, which flank attack are we talking about? What kind of pawn play are we talking about? Obviously not the queen side. The white king is at the queen side. You're not going to start to self-destruct there. It's got to be the king side. And the most logical thing would be something like g4 and g5, but how do you make it happen? And what's going to be the threat even after you play g4, g5? Here, white had a very cool idea to play h5, to play knight h4, gain access to the f5 square. Again, at the same time, white is gaining space. Knight f6. And I think what happened here is that Bacro rejected this because he did not see how he can continue. Because let's say knight h4, black accepts the pawn. And obviously you're thinking like it's got to be knight g6. Takes, bishop f7, bishop h5, show castle. So what? Black is completely fine. There's no attack. But you know, in this position, I mean, this was some total super GM stuff. White had a chance to get the terrific attack, to play bishop f5. The threat is to take with e6, and I could take with a pawn. That's the idea. So if I play here, first white plays f3. I mean, actually, I think also this was pretty good. Takes. here, what I'm doing, I don't know. But the engine line continues with f3. Engine wants to play g4. My king is stuck in the center. And in this position, white is better. Yeah, black has 2 minor pieces for the rook, but white has 2 pawns. It's an endgame, so white is better. Like, it's a crazy solution. I don't know, probably it needs to be Magnus or Sindarov to pick this up. And Etienne did not find it, and ultimately he went from the wrong choice. But I think that the logic was pretty sound. He felt that the blacking is quite stuck in the center. Castling short is dangerous, so that's why for Etienne, the logic was that he should open up the position. But the problem is, very concretely, from afar, he didn't probably estimate that the black king can walk to the queen's side. All right, let me show you another one. Let's say this position from the black's perspective. Black is the move. And if I would ask you, where's the pawn play? Actually, yeah. So it's still part of the subject to push in the center or start the flank attack, even though we're touching a bit another subject. You know, I showed this position to several students. And what was their first answer? How do I carry out d5? How do I make d5 happen? And my answer would be, but why? Why would you want to play d5? And the answer was like, I don't know, just because I can. Like, you got to play d5, right? There's no rule that says you have to make a break in the center. Again, we are going back to this. We talked about that so many players, especially at the club level, they like to make the pawn breaks in the center where the opponent is most defended. This pawn defends, this pawn, the knight, the bishop indirectly is threatening some bishop h7 stuff. So why would we even think about playing d5? So instead of this, what we can do, first we have to deal with the pin. It's a bit annoying, right? And I do not want to retreat with the bishop because my bishop on c5 is looking really great. So we play h6. White goes here. We play d6 just because it opens up the light square. Bishop on c8. The bishop is going to control the critical d4 square. White plays king h1. And now comes the key idea. White definitely wants to play f4. Try to capitalize on the spin at the knight at f6. Here comes g5. And this is something we are going to talk about with the... Actually, I think this more belongs in the part of the bootcamp. The king's pawns play when the center is locked. So the center is locked, but instead of going for the break in the center, we're opting for the flank attack. It looks a bit scary, but ultimately the question is how white is planning to exploit it. It's all about the space. This is how the game progressed. King g7. Black's idea is normally, like, the idea would be play knight f7, knight h7, knight f8, knight g6, knight f4, which is a very long way to play. And I'm thinking, why can't we immediately attack h5? h5? If white plays f3, we play h4. Let's say here, we could trade it. Here, maybe knight h5, rook h8, queen f6, knight f4, initiate some pawn play with this g4, h3. Yes, we are using the pawns in front of the king. They're also part of the pawn play. We're going to talk about it a bit separately in the respective part of the bootcamp. But white played h4, went aggressive, hoping that I'm going to close the position with g4, except after knight g4, white's position immediately is in shambles. Because if he takes it, we play h4. If he takes it, rook h1, g3, queen g5, some sort of a sacrifice on h4. And you should see by now that there's a major difference between the king's safety. The black king is super safe. The white king is wide open. Even though he has 2 pawns similarly covering the king. But your pieces are attacking him and none of his pieces are attacking you. Let me show you another one. This, by the way, is a pretty cool game. I played it against the coach of the world champion, the Maraja Gukesh, Grzegorz Gajewski, the man behind the most of the success of the world champion. I was playing with the white collar a couple of years ago in German Bundesliga. So I was playing with the white collar, this Neo-Catalan. I really like these c4 g3 stuffs. Knight of 3 here. Let me just go straight to the point. Queen c2. The point of queen c2 is that black wants to play b5, bishop b7, solve the problem of the bad Catalan bishop. I'm talking about it in my bootcamp, the Catalan. Go check it out. So queen c2. Now b5 is obviously going to be knight e4, knight c6. The bishop is opening up with a very strong power. Black plays c5. Knight c3 here, Shukas. Okay. Now, I am making the moves that I know that really are necessary. I'm talking about knight f3, g3, bishop d2, Shukas. I'm talking about queen c2, knight c3. But I'm not using my pawns just yet. And why? Because I'm waiting a bit for some information. And I think, again, it falls a bit in a different category, is that I formulated myself the following rule, that there's a universal move principle. You probably have never heard of it. It's because I basically formulated myself. It probably is used by other coaches by different name, but that's how I call it. I call it a universal move. So it means that I want to find the moves that are going to serve me in million other scenarios. Meaning, I'm making the moves that in most occasions they're going to be useful. So I don't really want to find myself in a situation like Doctor Strange had this one chance out of 40 million against Thanos. Which is terrible, terrible odds. So I want to find a move that in most occasions they are really good. And for example, that's why it's a short castle. That's why it's not d3. That's why it's not b3. That's why it's not a4. Because I do not know anything about those moves. What I know for sure is that I need to castle. So I castle short. I keep my eyes open. And again, we cannot predict how the game is going to proceed. But always keep your eyes open. Let's say black plays bishop b7. Supernatural move. I think this is also a signal that we should try to get to some sort of a Catalan position, because black might have some problems with this last bishop. I'm also better developed. So what I do, I think I play d4. Looks super logical. And if black takes it a couple of times, let's say takes, I'm going to play something like rook d1. There's some problems for him. Maybe even, I don't know. I haven't checked this with an engine. Perhaps I can play bishop b4, e5, knight f5, and black's position is sort of unpleasant, even though we have a symmetrical pawn structure on the board, which, by the way, I think, again, I should underline. Do not be afraid to play symmetrical pawn structures. This is something I talk about in my Catalan bootcamp and some other videos. It doesn't matter. Having a symmetrical pawn structure, it does not mean it's going to be a draw. It really comes down to the activity of your and your opponent's pieces. So in this position, black decided not to play bishop e7 because, once again, d4. If he plays short castle, it's going to be bishop b4, bishop d6, takes, rook d1. Yeah, the position is opening up and black has some problems. Obviously, that's why my opponent showed that he's a world-class player. He played b5. But there's a very big difference. You play b5 or you play b6. And based on his decision, my approach is going to change. So if he plays b6, I still play d4. He fixes the problem of the bad Catalan bishop. Here, takes, rook d1, looks super logical. We initiate the pawn play. We play e4. We walk away from the pin. And the white keeps pushing. Like white plays rook c1, maybe h3, maybe a4, e5, and plays something at a king's side. So we still have a bit some space advantage. White's position is slightly to be preferred. Ultimately, it's not really a big deal. But my opponent plays b5. I'm thinking, okay, now if I play d4, same idea. Same idea, bishop before, takes, rook d1, show castle, e4. Having the pawn on b5, I think it actually helps black. Because now in this position, he doesn't have to retreat to c7. He can go to something aggressive, threaten to play b4, and basically say that I have an extra tempo. Quite a big difference. So what do we do? Well, we look at this position and we ask ourselves, do not we already have some sort of information from the opponent's last move? Now that the opponent has played b5, can we use this somehow in our advantage? You could, of course, you could play b3. You could play bishop b2. You could play d3 and you could play rook c1 and rook d1 and knight e2, etc. But you have made a lot of moves and you don't know why. Like, these are generic squares for your pieces, but the pawn play is missing. So that's why what I recommend to do is to play a4. Immediately try to target the pawn on b5. We are not yet completing our development because first I want to get information where we are going to position our pieces based on what the opponent's going to do. And it really matters. Because if black plays, for example, rook b8, super natural move, keep the pawn on b5, takes. Now we have an a file. And now we play d4. Big difference. Because now in some lines, we can use, for example, check this out. Black plays bishop d6, stopping bishop before threat. Open up the position. We're following the rule. We have a lead in development. We should open up the position. Takes. I think so. I mean, he has to take with a bishop. With knight, it looks quite scary. Some sort of a b4 stuff. Or, actually, I should have checked what happens. Let me check very quickly. Knight c5, maybe knight e4. Yeah, knight e4. I don't even need engine. I think knight e4 is looking super unpleasant. Yeah, knight e4, bishop d7, b4, knight a4. Ooh, knight b5. Queen c2, knight e6, bishop b5, queen c7 takes. Ooh, there's even bishop c6. Oh my goodness. But all of this is possible only because the black king is stuck in the center. So we follow the rule, open up the position, try to exploit black's lack of development, and there you go, there's the result. So he takes with the bishop, we play here, and if black continues with bishop d6, now we use the open file, rook a7, knight b5, very cool. Takes, black can resign. We're up a pawn, black king is walking, we have like one more extra pawn, probably incoming. So all of this was just because we followed the basic pawn play. Obviously, there's a bit more complex lines like e5, knight e5, whatever. I'm not really going to bore you with these complexities, but ultimately, black is in trouble. And if instead he plays b4, which was played by Gajewski, b4, now we see that because of the pawn play, we have gained access to an outpost. And remember what I told you at the very beginning. When the pawns go forward, they have a chance to get a bit overstretched, and they leave weaknesses behind. Weak squares. We can use the c4 square for the knight. And it's not like your standard knight b1, d3, knight e2, knight c4, which probably is also playable. But I kind of like this move more. Knight e1. We want to play knight e3, knight c4. So let's get straight to the point. Obviously, black is rushing to complete development. Knight e3, knight c4. Watch out for the bishop f4, by the way. Watch out for a5, disrupting black's access to the b6 square. So black played here, here, and here. Okay. The next super critical moment. It's definitely an opening success for white. I feel it. My opponent feels it. The question is how to proceed. So because of our pawn play, we have accomplished something. We have a knight on c4. It's attacking some weaknesses here. But it's not enough. We need to fight for more. And naturally, the first thing you're noticing is, yes, there's this very juicy square on d6. Let's jump it. Like, let's play knight e6. Well, but black doesn't have to take it. Black can play bishop c6. And what I'm struggling is to figure out what's my next move. Because black's going to play knight e5, and I think you have to retreat. Go back. It doesn't work. And the same applies for bishop d6. Black doesn't have to take at all. So instead, he could play, I don't know, knight e5, make some trades, put the knight on b6. So what? We can't use the d6 square. Something needs to be done. And we're still probably missing another element of the pawn play. So where is it? Where is the pawn play? And again, we're looking at the position. We're thinking it's got to be d4, right? Right? Yeah, it's got to be d4. Is it? Is it d4? Well, I don't like this move. Because if you play d4, it opens up the bishop on e7. It opens up the knight on d7. It opens up the rook on c8. It weakens the e4 square. And when you're having such a choice, just list these things in your mind. And does it feel right to you? Even though, yes, this is really tricky, d4 is the right way to play in the Catalan. Is it not? Well, but every position is unique. So it's not d4. It's not right. The right move is e4. And why e4? So, like, this is such a crazy move. Why we're doing this? We're blocking our bishop on g2. We're weakening the d4 square. And what are we going to do next? But what I would suggest you to do is, this is a bit advanced technique. When you're not entirely sure what you should do next, like how to make a progress, think backwards. Think about your opponent. How would you play? If you were playing with black, what would you do? And I think that black wants to play knight e5, trade the bishop, maybe play knight b6. I just do not see any other moves. So that's why with the move e4, we're gaining space, we're stopping knight e5, and we're anticipating knight b6 because nothing else makes sense. It's not that we are going to play e5 here. We are just playing rook e1. Maybe the idea could be rook e1, rook d1, d4 if black is like totally doing nothing. But I think he's going to do something, right? And he played knight b6. He wants to take on c4, get to the pawn on e4. And it looks super, super logical to play knight e2, to keep the knight on c4. Yes, it's a beautiful knight. But at the same time, we have loosened up the control of the d4 square, which is something I do not like. Probably it's completely fine. Black could maybe play like knight e8, knight e6, try to fight back. But in this position, I suggest to play rook e1, play rook d1, see what happens. Again, black doesn't really have a choice. He has to take it. And now we take with the pawn. And this is, I don't know, I was thinking about how to make it as a separate subject in my bootcamp. Changing the pawn structure is one of the hardest things in chess, and I do not know how to categorize it. How we know in which position you are changing the pawn structure, like every single position is very concrete. But when I'm going to this position, I'm trying to get some sort of king's in and attack structure. It looks like a king's in and attack. I'm about to play e5, I'm about to play h4 and start a kingside attack because I'm a big king's in and attack fan. He plays h6, rook d1, queen c8. Now I felt that I can always play e5. I play knight e5, put the knight on d3, play b3. A couple of moves later, I realized I do not have a very clear plan. So maybe something like bishop c1, bishop b2, f3, g4, h4, go for this kingside attack, but ultimately it's not a lot. Well, what can you do? You did everything correct. Using the pawn play, got an opening advantage, and from here you have to rely on your piece play, maybe combining together with a pawn play. But again, I hope you're seeing the pattern here that we got to this position only because of the pawn play. And again, we're not going to really go through the entire game. You can check it in the PGN. I'm going to leave it there. I messed it up later. The game finished in a draw. So my honor was saved. But I really love this opening part. All right. And now the position from the thumbnail. This is one of my rapid games against the Finnish, I think he's Finnish, player Ilkka Mustonen. I'm playing with white. What do we see in this position? We're seeing that white has the bishop pair. And normally you would expect that we have to open up the position. Like when I have the bishop pair, I have to open the position, open diagonals, and because of the bishop pair, I will be doing much better, right? Well, I wish it was so simple. And let's say you will play something like knight c4 here, should castle, just because I have to castle. By the way, it's such a ridiculous rule. Like, we do not have to castle just because we can. Castle, so there you go, we play d4. The idea is he's going to take it, I'm going to take with the bishop, trade knights, trade rooks, and I'm going to outplay my opponent in this two-bishop endgame. But suddenly black plays b5. He opens up the position. He plays bishop a3. He takes over the c file. Why black should be worse here at all? Actually, I like black's position a bit better. That's why let's go back to the starting position and let's have a look. What do we see in this position? So what is quite clear? One thing is quite clear to me is that this last square bishop probably belongs on f3 on this diagonal because it's going to apply some pressure against the pawn on b7. The knight clearly is getting to c4. And also it's quite evident to me that if you put the bishop on f3, the king belongs on e2. So you're going to cover some weaknesses that your last square bishop no longer is protecting, right? But we still need a pawn play. And maybe playing bishop f3, king e2 is a bit too early. So where's the pawn play? Well, which pawns are the most flexible here? And I think they're the king's pawns. And if you figure out that you can play g4, suddenly you start to get a lot of interesting ideas. Because the threats to play g5 and get to the pawn on g7. So for example, let's say black plays something like bishop e7. You play g5. Let's say he goes, I don't know where he goes, like here. He wants to trade a pawn for a pawn. We play h4. The pawn on g7 is hit. Do you play f6? Weaken your structure, the pawn on e6. Castles, maybe bishop f3. Knight e6, or maybe I could even start with knight c4, or bishop d6, king e2, and what is the black knight doing on d6? Maybe I can still go for the king set attack, rook g1, h5, g6. Why not? All of this is because of our pawn play of g4, g5. Black responded with h6. Now I play bishop f3, king e2. If black plays a long castle, he's going to have problems with the pawn on f7. So he decided to castle short. Now there's the pawn play, h4, g5. And, you know, the advice I could give you, do not think that you have no checkmate ideas if the queens are traded. You would be surprised how dangerous attacks you can build also with the queens traded off. So white is simply trying to play g5. Open up h-file, double the rooks, and deliver the mate. Black played here, rook g1, g5 is a massive threat. And apparently here, black had to pick up the totally insane move g6, which is very, very difficult to find. The point is g5, h5, black is holding on, but white plays knight b1, knight c3, opens up the bishop on f3. Because of our pawn play, black cannot put the bishop on f6, and yeah, his position is pretty bad. Black played bishop f6. He wants to trade the bishops. Takes. But now the problem is that after g takes, knight c4, suddenly we are about to anchor our knight on f5. Let's say here, takes on d5. There you go. There's a weakness on f5. g5, open up the king side. And we end up winning a pawn. And the rest is basically technique. Or what happened in the game, he took with the knight. I play g5. Let I play rook h2. It's a very simple idea. Double the rooks, go for the checkmate. He tries to stop me, bishop e4. Bishop h7 could be a threat. And finally, black collapses. f5 takes, bishop b7, winning a material, having an attack. Black was unable to hold for any longer. Obviously, I have many more games like this. So maybe I'm going to show you like, I don't know, let me see which game I could show you. For example, no. Yeah, this is going to be quite similar. This is one of my favorite examples because I played it against the Latvian chess legend Edvin Kengis. So I was playing with white, Kengis was playing with black. It was a rapid game. We played it several years ago. It was an Italian game. Bishop c4, knight f6, d3, h6. By the way, this is what Goryachkina played. Was it yesterday in the candidates tournament against Jujiner? Although I think it was a bit different. C3, bishop c5, b4, bishop b7. Yeah, this is how they played it. So I played Shook Castle d6. Again, basically mirroring the idea that Emil Schmidik played against me. He wants to trade his knight for my Lasco bishop. I play a4, and he played g5. Okay, so this is the position. Black is super provocative. By the way, provocation, it's a fascinating subject, and probably at some point I'm going to make a bootcamp out of it because so many players like to provoke the opponent. You're playing against a very solid opponent who's normally, not possible to be budged out of his comfort zone. So that's why very often you're playing something provocative. And for some reason, Edvin's decided to play something provocative against me. I don't know why. The point is, he wants to play bishop g7 or maybe g4, h5, and generate some counterplay. And now you're thinking, wait, he starts a flank attack. I should do a counter strike in the center, right? Right? Well, this rule not always works. It's more like a guideline. And if you here play d4, it looks supernatural. Black plays g4, takes. Even might look pretty interesting, but knight e5 is super powerful. Bishop g4 is killing, and black just wins. You can't do this. You also gotta do this with the idea to play c3. c3, bishop g7, d4. Because the pawn on e4 is now under attack. Or maybe black could even play g4, then collect the pawn on d4. There's many things what are wrong with this idea. So it quite doesn't work. Well, luckily for us, there's still a rule that nobody can be checkmated by a couple of pawns. So we can play for space advantage. And basically, this is where we can use the so-called side-pawn pushes, which is what I talked about in my space advantage bootcamp. We play a5, we gain space, we initiate targets, and again, based on the results, we're going to know where to place the pieces. And if you ask me, I don't know if I want to play a6 or not. I have no idea. We'll see. First, I want to see the reaction from the opponent. So he plays a6, like he acknowledges, yes, a6 could be unpleasant, let me block it just in case. Now we play knight c3, great square for the knight, bishop g7. And the question here, we do not know yet where to position our pieces. So that's why I very often, before you're automatically committing to like generic moves, you can play rook e1, bishop e3, whatever. Ask yourself, what do you see in the position? And what I'm seeing in this position is that my opponent has weakened f5 square. So this brings me the question, how can I fight for this square? And there's only two pieces that can get there. It's one of the knights. if I put this queenside knight, let's say knight e2, knight g3, knight f5, looks super tempting. I'm also weakening my control of the center. I think that black can play d5, knight e5, and I can forget about getting my knight on f5 because it's no longer relevant. That's why, again, you have to, at any given time, you have to remember it's not only about you, me, right? My ideas, I'm going to play me, etc. It's the game of two players. We can use the other knight. And the knight on f3 is not doing anything. So that's why it's knight e2. Here, rook e1. And the idea ultimately is to play knight f1, knight e3, and control these squares. So yes, still the topic is the pawn play. But again, you're going to see very often it's linked together with the piece play. Bishop e6, knight f1, c6, black wants to play d5. We take on e6, f takes on e6. And again, remember, like, we had this discussion about this bishop e6, f takes on e6 before, did we not? Right? It seems that black has solved the problem of the f5 square. And why did we play even knight e2, knight f1? Because we wanted to get to f5. But the problem was the d5 push. And we still cannot fully exploit the f5 square. Situation is rapidly changing. So we take on e6, take on e6. And now the question is, now what? So we have this position. Black is solid. Black has not yet decided where to castle. What should you do next? Super, super important moment. Again, we can complete development. I can give a place for my Daxford bishop. I can put the knight on g3, and I don't know why I'm doing this. I can put the queen on e2. But to be honest, I have no idea why I'm doing this. So once again, the pawn play steps into action, and we have to do something. So what is it? Is it the break in the center? Is it d4? Because it kind of makes sense. The opponent is stuck in the center, so we should open it up, right? But at the same time, we're also breaking some rules. We're opening up the Daxford bishop on g7. And why did we trade this pawn again? Black's going to just castle short, play d5. He's just fine. So it doesn't feel right. And remember what I told you, like probably more than once already. It's much more effective to play at the flank. We want to put the knight on b6, or at least control the square. But the problem is, if we play knight a4, it drops a pawn. So keep formulating. I think I need b4. It controls the a5 pawn. It gains space. Black castle short. We play knight a4. Black goes here. We still need some pawn play. We play c4. And the threat in some lines is to play c5 and weaken this pawn on e5. Even though, by the way, here the engine says this is not accurate. Accurate is to play h3, because black seemingly wants to play g4, initiate his own pawn play. At the king side, play knight h2, h5, and just play cool as a cucumber, rook e3, rook g3. Which, yeah, if you say it like that, it kind of makes sense to get to the pawn on g5. So black apparently cannot easily play h5. So g4 takes, rook g3, and black here has to do whatever, like knight f5. Some total engine nonsense. But I'm a human being. I play c4. You see, I have a definitely pawn majority at the queen side. Queen f7, rook a2. And the game proceeds. I think I analyzed this game in another video. I'm going to have to find in which one. It was a really fascinating game. But again, because of our used pawn play at the very beginning, we're able to get some privileges. And maybe one more example. Yeah, let's wrap up with this one about breaks in the center or pawn or flank attack. This is one of my most beautiful games that I ever played in terms of the strategical power. Several years ago in France, French Team Chess Championships against Johan Benitach, an international master, and played with white. My opponent played against me the Benko, and he didn't know that I love to play against the Benko. Absolutely adore it. And before we proceed with some very concrete solutions, let's have a look. What do we see in the position? Like sometimes people forget that we simply have to look and maybe be able to identify things clearly and then ask ourselves, what can we do about it? The first thing is, which is very clear, black has some sort of a cluster of the pieces at the queen side. Everything is stuck there, and he is waiting for me to play knight c4. Like I just played knight c3, knight e1. Let me just draw it to you. This is my recent maneuver, and he played knight b6. He expects that I'm going to play knight c4 trade just because I can, I suppose. But there's one thing that immediately jumps in our attention. The black king is weak. We could try to organize a direct assault. What kind of pawn play are we talking about? And the first thing, it just feels it's got to be a 5. Yes, a 5, open up the king side, but there's a problem. This move comes as a cost. At the cost, we weaken the e5 square. Let's say black plays knight e8, takes. Black wants to play knight e7, knight e5, and protect the king. So, now what? This is where Engine says e5 is a super cool move. Play bishop d3, threaten to take on g6. Black cannot really apparently defend against it. Takes e6, bishop c3 with a crushing attack. Well, maybe. But there's also another idea. We can still use the pawn play at the king side and start a flank attack, which is h4. The idea is as follows. We are using the pawns in front of our king to open up the king side. The threat is to play h5, loosen up the pawn on g6, and only then play 5. So if black will play h5, we play f5. Let's say he plays knight e7, takes, and now we're definitely looking for some sort of e5 push. Maybe knight c4, e5, the pawn on g6 is dropping. If the pawn on g6 drops, black's position just collapses. He plays e6. We play a5. And again, this is one of those moments where I already said, it's so hard to categorize how to be able to adapt to change the pawn structure. That's the hardest thing. I mean, it's not even hard at the club level. It's also pretty difficult at competitive chess, at the GM level, because the biggest mistake you can do is to be not flexible. That you're stuck to your thinking, like you think, oh, I have this pawn structure, I will never ever change it. But chess is a very rapidly changing environment. And I think that if you're able to distill what is important in the position and what is not, you should be super adaptive. And here in this position, as you can see, black plays e6. He wants to get the knight on e6 and have some counterplay. And we can change the structure, play e5, which is something we never intended to do before, so that we get the bishop on c4, play f5, and have a direct attack. And this is, by the way, how the game finished. Knight f6, f5, there's a straight attack. And again, there's a rule. When there's a straight attack, the weaknesses do not matter. The weak pawns do not matter. So that's why, yeah, chess is hard. He played knight h5, knight g4. Now the position clarifies. I just prepare the attack. F takes, rook f1, super clear target here. He defends, and finally there's the crash through. Takes, rook g6, it's threatening. There's a bishop on c4. Takes, mate is inevitable here, and he resigned because it's either rook h6 or rook g8, depending on where he goes. All right, okay. Now, this part is over. And let's talk about how to use properly the pawns in front of the king. When we talk about the pawns in front of the king, you would think that they are there to protect the king, and they should never ever move forward. So for example, like any standard scenario, for example, the same Lopez. Let's play e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop c4. Black responds with something, castles, knight f6, d3, etc., etc., etc. So the rule is normally as follows. These pawns, I am never going to touch these pawns. Right there and there to protect my king, and I should focus on the game elsewhere. This is the thing that you have probably learned at the very beginning, and it's true. But I think at the very beginning, you are learning to learn principles and rules so that you know what is the best way to play chess. And then over time, you become so good in the game that you realize that some rules can be broken. First, you learn the rules, and then you learn to break the rules. That's how it goes ultimately. And when you're at this level, it means that you're already a very good player. Let me show you a couple of examples what I'm talking about, otherwise it's just blabbering. This is one of my games that I played in the Swedish League several years ago. My opponent played e4. Of course, I played the Leningrad Dutch. I'm a big fan. I mean, I wanted to play the Leningrad Dutch. First, it started with a5. Bishop before, knight f6, e3. There's a catch that g6 immediately is dangerous because of h4, h5, which is not really relevant here. So I played e6, I played b6, and we got in the territory of the Neiksans Dutch, which also I have made a bootcamp about. I gave a check, took on c3, played the short castle, and it's very easy to play with black. You want to play stuff like d6, knight e7, knight e4, maybe think about some e5 push. White has the bishop pair, but he doesn't know what to do with him. That's why in this position, he decided to trade one of them. And fast forwarding to the game, if he plays bishop h4, I think g5 looks very natural, because after bishop g3, my king is a bit exposed, but there's no way he can actually exploit it. And for example, after knight e4, his pawn on c3 is under attack, and can play queen f6, I can play rook e8, and as you can see, I'm very aggressively using the pawns in front of my king. The pawns that are supposed to shelter my king. White decided to take at f6, takes it, e4, seek a counter-strike in the center, everything's logical, rook e8. The thing is, he cannot really take on f5, because now suddenly the knight on f3 is hit by my bishop on b7. His pawn structure is worse, like it's not a big deal, but now with the pawn on c3 and c4, they're double for no good reason. That's why he played rook e1, e5. Here the problem is that if you take it, there's going to be e4, and white loses material, so he played d5. And this is the first part of the pawn play in front of the king's pawns, and probably the easiest part, where we're going to talk about how to proceed when the center is locked. It's super easy. Like, it's the principle is as follows. Like, you probably remember what I said in the bootcamp, that a flank attack should be met with a counter strike in the center. So when we start to push the pawns either at the queen side or the king side, the best practice, which might not always work anyway, is to do a counter strike in the center. So at least you're thinking about it, right? That's why you would think that for me to start the flank attack, I have to close the center. There you go. It just happened in this position. The center is closed, and what we can do, we can initiate a flank attack, which is 4. And that's why I think that these examples are the easiest ones, because basically for white, for your opponent, it's going to be much more challenging to slow you down, because it's very clear here that you are very aggressive at the king side. You're missing out the typical bad Doxwell bishop of the kings in defense. By the way, look at this lovely pawn chain, the arrow that totally shows you that you have to play at the king side. And at the same time, for white, he couldn't really play c5 because the pawn is not on b3 or b4. So that's why it's a pretty terrible structure. And this is how the game progressed. You play knight e2, I play g5. It's very straightforward. The traders play knight f6, g4, open up the king side, get to the king. Here, white tried to resist. I traded it. Here, g4. And probably the best advice I could give you here is not to rush. Again, it has nothing to do with the pawn play, really, but enjoy your moment. fix the queen side, make sure that you're not missing out your opponent's counterplay, because the worst thing that can happen to you in such a position is that you think that your opponent is not doing anything and he's just going to sit there quietly. Even in such positions, you always have to ask yourself what I would do if I was my opponent. And I think it's definitely some sort of a c5 push. So you always have to keep an eye on this. Maybe there could be a pawn sacrifice to open up the queen side. So that's why I was very careful about this. Always making sure that, by the way, here, c5, d6 is a threat. And if I take with a b pawn, now he can crash through at the b file. So I defend against this, and now it's time for the attack. And this is basically how the game finished. The c5 break is never happening. I improve my pieces. I'm super patient. And finally, white collapses. Yeah. h3, trying to seek the counterattack and exposing the king. All the pieces are for white completely disconnected, and this is where white resigned because of knight f3, queen g4, and he is dropping the knight. Anyway, like the second part of the game was not really super relevant, and I could have even stopped with the move of f4. I just wanted to show you that it's a very simple example where your flank attack is very easy to succeed if the center is closed. Let me show you another one. Let me see which example it's gonna be. Yeah, maybe this one. Again, not super complex. It was quite an easy flowing game. I was playing with the white color several years ago in the Finnish league. The Bra Lopez, castles, b5, bishop b7, d3, here, 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 d6. Okay, now, you probably remember something that in the Italian game, Andrea Lopez, black wants to play knight a5, trade off my bishop on b3, which is something he could not have done before because the pawn on e5 was loose. So he defends it, he's threatening to play knight a5. I defend the bishop. Yeah, here, by the way, it's a very logical question. I would imagine you would have, is it a3 or is it a4? Because there was another game where I met b5 with a4. So how do I decide that in this game it's a3? Well, it's a bit different structure. And I think that if I play a4, I don't really have any business at a queen side. Like, it's a perfectly playable line. But with this cautious move a3, my primary purpose is to save the Lasco bishop. And I want to focus on the king's attack, meaning I want to play knight f1, knight g3, exploit some weaknesses. Here, I want to use the Lasco bishop's long control of this long diagonal. And I just do not want to initiate anything at the queen side because I think this is where black should play. That's the difference. Like, again, that's why it's very difficult to find a common pattern that against b5 you always play a4. Against b5 you always play a3. It's not how it works. Again, I think that the ability to see the larger picture is super important here. Black played here, c5, knight f1. Here, bishop g5 is a pretty common provocation move. Like, I provoke h6. Obviously, I do not want to take on f6. Now you see this pawn is a target. He cannot easily play g6 to counter the f5 square. Again, like I already said, this would be a pretty fascinating bootcamp. I will make bootcamp about it at some point, I promise. So knight g3 here, knight h4 here, knight f5, targeting some threats here, here. It just feels like something's about to go down here. Queen f3, pretty common maneuver for the Real Lopez. Here, here, here. And finally, black caves in. So knight h5, white's attack is totally demolishing. g6, knight h6, you cannot take it. That's a checkmate. You cannot take on h6. There's a checkmate. So black cannot do this. He plays g5. Also, this is the moment when we have accomplished total superiority of our pieces. The bishop on a2 is a monster. The knight on f5 is a beast. The knight on h5 is a legend. The bishop on d2 stands fantastic. It controls those two files. But something critical is missing. So we still need a pawn play to make some progress. And On this occasion, it's going to involve the pawns in front of the king, which maybe is not so complicated. We play h4. It doesn't really weaken the king, but it creates the necessary target on g5. And for black, defending the pawn on g5 is incredibly difficult. Because let's say he plays queen d8. Because of the pawn play, we opened up the h file, which we can now use g3, king g2, rook h1, and there's no way black is going to survive this. That's why black decided to play f6, which increases the power of the Slavsko bishop. And now there's a tactical solution. Takes, and a simple and h4. So it's a bit weird move, but suddenly knight g6 is literally impossible to defend against. And against knight e7, I forgot to check, like, there's definitely something like maybe this, and some knight f6 or queen f7. Like there's no way there's no checkmate here, right? Because the black queen is so far away from the action. Yeah, so in the game, black gave up the exchange and the rest is to the converting phase. Like a very simple example, one pawn push. But again, if you have like developed a feeling that I will never ever touch my king's pawns, they are there to protect the king, you are basically putting yourself in a box, which is not a very good thing. By the way, I would like also to immediately address, there's this very famous expression by Ben Feingold, who said, never ever play f3 or f6. But I don't really know where originally this comes from, but Ben is a grandmaster. He definitely knows this himself really a lot. It really depends on the position. So basically what he was saying is that at the club level, do not play f3 to weaken the king because maybe there's going to be some long diagonal problems. Let me just show you one example where f3 is actually a very good move, which I showed you at the very beginning right here. Yeah, so this is an endgame. Actually here, f3 is the perfect move. You gain space, you gain... you limit the knight on f6. You're about to play king f2. The king feels so much more active in this position, and then you're going to play g4, h4, or whatever. All right. Let me show you the next one. The next example, maybe this one. So white just played queen c1. White just played queen c1 to attack the pawn on h6. And white is saying that you cannot castle. Let's have a look at this position more closely. Now, what do we see? What do we see in terms of the pawn play? We see that white is very static, meaning he has a big cluster of pieces here. Basically, all of them are positioned on the first two ranks. He has no capability, at least immediately, to make a break in the center. He can try to play a4, but we can always meet it with rook b1 to protect the pawn on b5. I mean, if we want, we can always play b4, of course. There's no f4 for white. That's why, in terms of the pawn play, white's chosen strategy is a total disaster. All right. What are we supposed to do about it? Now, we cannot castle short, but in which direction do you think we should focus our game? Ask yourself, where do you feel the strongest? Is it the queen side? Is it the center? Or is it the king side? And actually, I think that this position really resembles the Sicilian Rossolimo misplayed, the very first example I showed you at the very beginning. And I don't think we need to castle at all. Because when it comes to the castling, there's two main reasons why we are castling short. I have said it multiple times on my YouTube channel, but there goes again. First reason, protect the king. Second reason, connect the rooks. That's it. No other reasons. So there's no need for you to castle if your king is not feeling safer. And if you can connect the rooks in any other way, be my guest. But anyway, here we should play at the king side because this is indeed where we feel the strongest. And if you want that, like maybe there's this mini arrow showing you that you have to play at the king side. With the pawn on c7, maybe it would be more evident. But then again, the white could be able to play d4 and rip apart the center. How do we do it? We could play g5, knight f8, and knight g6, which looks very promising. But what I do not like it is that the g5 move immediately gives away what we want to do. So I propose to play knight f8. It doesn't really give away anything. We want to play knight e6, or maybe g5 the next move, and basically we are asking white make a decision, which is what he did. He played knight e5. He tries to, organize some activity in the center. Takes. We play g5. The king is a bit stuck in the center, but white is in no position to exploit it. Maybe white had to try to play d4. But again, how about I'm just winning a piece with g4? The point is obviously here takes. This would be really silly. Yeah, it's a double checkmate. It's a mate by the bishop and the rook on e1. So we cannot do this. But I think that after something like g4, white is just dropping a piece for no good reason. White wants to organize the counter-strike. It doesn't work. That's why he played g3, knight g6, again reinforcing the threat of g4, king g2. Now what? Should we castle now? Should castle and play a5? Because this is how everybody plays in these positions. I do not think we have to do this because the king on e8 feels just fine, and the rook already stands on the file that we can open. So we can play g4, we can play h5, and because of the pawn play, we have gained space, and we have a direct attack, and the king is feeling just fine. And basically that's how the game concluded. He played c4, I play h4. He obviously tries to do something at the queen side, unlock the queen side. He plays d4, seeking counterplay, quite doesn't work. Queen f6. Again, the key to success is being patient. And we are threatening to organize something at the h file. By the way, unfortunately, I think this was not working. Takes. There was a cool idea. Rook h2, here queen f2, but I do not see the checkmate immediately because the rook at a8 cannot immediately jump to h8. And sadly, also the queen sacrifice is not immediate mate. Yeah, it would be really lovely here and jump with the bishop on h3, but it's not the mate. So bishop f5, takes, queen e7, queen d7. There's a lot of maneuverings. And finally, white caved in. Anyway, the rest of the game is not really super important. Check the PGN if you want. But everything starts with the understanding what passive play leads if you're not using the pawn play. This is what white just did. And we don't have to castle short just because we have to, just because we can. And instead, since the center is locked, we can go for the early kingside attack. Yeah, this, by the way, example, I think I already have shown a couple of times on my YouTube videos. I'll just maybe go straight to the point. It's one of my favorite games against Glenn Flair, a grandmaster from England. I think he's actually living in France these years. I was playing with a white collar. We played it exactly 10 years ago. And I'll just go straight to the point. So in this position, white is slightly better. White has a very strong central pawn. We just stopped the black from playing knight c4 or bishop a6. And the threat is to play knight g5. Knight g5, it kind of creates some threats against the pawn on h7. So the question to you, what do you think is the right way to play? Is it g6 or is it h6? You know, it's really fascinating that so many players, they like to play automatically g6. Because h6, and I think it has to do something with psychology, it doesn't feel like it's a window for the king because the queen still protects it. But obviously, when you think about the position a bit more concretely, you realize that it's still very far until we can try to go for some backrank checkmate. And until that time, probably the white queen no longer will be standing on g3. But that's how it works. Like, psychologically, ask yourself, if you have been in this situation, you probably have been in this situation, that you want to play g6 because it feels a bit more natural. And on top of that, you want to play bishop f5, and it's like a confirmation bias that I'm right. But the thing is, Now black is making some weaknesses in the position that we can exploit. Sorry. So here we play rook e1. Black realized that bishop f5, we play queen e3. There's a double threat, queen h6, which was not there before, and queen e7. Crashed through the 7th rank. Black played here. We play knight e2. There's another threat to play c4, knight e4, queen c3, and get the knight on f6. How about that? Black fixed it. He played bishop f5 here. He played rook d8. All right. Now we have the following position. What should we do? Because if we do nothing, black will simply improve the position, play knight b7, walk away with the queen, put the knight on d6. That's a beautiful blockade. We have to make some kind of a progress. Now, we have an open file, and the first thing maybe you're thinking, how about we play queen e7? It feels right. We're crashing through at the 7th rank, but all it does, it initiates trades. And didn't I tell you at the beginning of this bootcamp, when there's an open file, it doesn't mean that all the heavy pieces have to disappear through this file. Let's say we play rook e1, black plays here, we play, I don't know, c4, takes, rook d7, so what? What do we accomplish? Not much. Let's go back to this position and ask ourselves, where do we feel the strongest? Clearly the king side. Black has some dark spot weaknesses, but knight e4 is quite not great because black's going to take it. This bishop we have is going to be pretty useless. Black's going to play knight e6, and actually I like black in this position. He just dominates the dark squares. Doesn't look good. This is where you should formulate that the problem is the last bishop. It needs to go. How do we get rid of it? Well, we play h3. The threat is to play g4. And if black plays h5, we can reinforce the threat. We play queen f3, play g4. I suppose he has to defend against this. We play queen f4. We're marching forward. Here, I think this is just very risky. Knight e4, knight f6 looks super, super dangerous. Or maybe just take on h3 immediately. I don't think the black can do this. And if he plays queen d6, there's a very cute tactic, takes, and g4. The point is, if black takes twice, there's knight e4, and he's just losing material. Most likely giving up the exchange is already the best that he can do. All of this is because of the pawn play involving the king's pawns. So he played queen d7, which turned out to be a mistake. I play g4, here, and bishop c2. So again, our big idea was to get c4 and queen c3, and this is what we're doing. We play queen c3, target the bishop, and then we want to land the knight on f6. And that's why black has to dramatically change the pawn structure and play f5. And this is probably going to be the hardest moment for you, because you have to be super adaptive to the ever-changing environment. And again, if you're going to be stuck to one idea, I am playing for my knight f3, knight g5 idea, and something happens, and you're like thinking, how do I carry out my big idea? You have to understand, as soon as something dramatic changes in the position, you have to reevaluate your strategy. So here, black just played f5. He weakens the king. This means that we can start a direct attack. And again, when you have a direct attack, the weaknesses, the weak pawns do not matter. So it was d6, it was bishop d5, it was knight f3, knight g5, king g2, and white's initiative develops. The pawn on d6 looks a bit weak, but black cannot exploit it. Actually, it's a very strong pawn. And I ended up winning a very, very nice game. I think that this game, I analyzed it more deeply in my most beautiful games. I have this playlist. At some point, I'm probably going to continue it. Just, you got to believe me, I have no time at the moment to continue it, but I will continue it at some point. All right, let me show you the next one, and the next example is next example, but the final part of the bootcamp is the most challenging one. we are going to use the pawns in front of the king when the center is wide open. And yes, it can be done. I'm going to show you many examples, but I suppose every single position is a bit different. So, for example, let's say e4, e5. This was one of my games again. My opponent was Edmund Bex. He's a candidate master, rated about 2100, something like that. He misplayed the opening. He put the weird knight on e6. I immediately felt that it's a good moment for me to go for the IQP. I give a lead in development. He tries to solve the problem of the knight. I obviously do not want to trade such a silly knight. I put the knight on e5. He wants to play bishop e6. He wants to trade it. And obviously I reject it. Bishop e5. Okay. So we kept this position. I just very quickly fast forwarded the opening phase. It's not super relevant. What's relevant is the pawn play. Now, we're looking at this position. We're thinking, well, we have some lead in development, but black is about to finish his own. He's about to play either knight e7 or knight e4. So how should we continue? And it's very easy for you to miss the momentum, which is, again, a bit different topic. But let's say you're thinking, I got to complete my development, and you're going to play rook e1. Supernatural move. I'll put the rook on the open file. You're also threatening, by the way, to trap a piece by f4 or h4. Very logical confirmation bias, by the way, immediately works. So you play rook e1. Black will play h6, just to make a window for the knight. You're thinking, oh, what should I do next? Okay, which piece is not yet developed? I'm going to play bishop e4. Knight e7, that's it. Your chances are gone. Just like that. So knight e7, let's say you could play like, I don't know, queen e2, takes, bishop d6. Black is completely fine. You just missed your moment. So where was it? Where was this moment? Now, let's have a look at this position more closely. And you realize one thing. Black is essentially down one tempo. So he needs to play knight e7, and he's going to be safe. But by definition, very often, if you play correctly, your opponent is not going to get this one tempo. So here the question to you is, will you be able to find... Sorry, had to blow my nose. When I talk for hours, it gets tricky. Are you able to find the weakest spot in black's position? And I think it has something to do with the knight on e5. Black has not yet played knight e7. And the knight on e5 is super important piece for your position. I could even give you a hint. There are tactics here. Can you figure it out? Like, it's not about trapping the knight. That's the first thing I think you're thinking about. Like, how do I trap it? And that's what I was thinking about. Like, how do I trap the knight? You can't. You can't trap the knight. What I played in the game is going to blow your mind. I played g4. Like, I'm pushing the pawns in front of my king, but I'm trying to trap the knight. So g4. I thought that, bishop d6 I saw. I thought that if he plays like this, I play h4 and I win a piece. Because he cannot play f6, there's going to be d6, discover check, and that's it. Black is toast, and he cannot save the knight. I mean, one check is here, knight h3, king g2, that's it. The pieces are gone, right? But he plays bishop d6, and if I take on f5, I play f4. It's not winning a piece because he takes on c3, he plays knight e4, and the knight escapes. But apparently here, I can still play f4, protect the knight, hit the bishop on g4, he walks away. And here, the best continuation, can you believe it? It's h4. So you're trapping the knight on g5. It works. It really works. So the knight has nowhere to go. I play king g2. If he plays f6, knight e3, the knight is completely trapped. It doesn't work. He takes on h4. And the hardest move to see from afar is queen e1. It's super difficult, but the knight is gone. He cannot save it. takes, he can win 2 pawns to save the knight. There's no other option really, but if he does this, you play e6 and you not only win a knight, but you just completely demolish him because the e-pawn is marching forward. He's completely underdeveloped and it's a crushing win for white. Like, it's an insane concept, but I just love this concept. And what you have to understand it, like, it's not random. The idea is very concrete. You want to win a piece, but yeah, it does involve f4, g4, f4, and h4. It's totally nuts. But normally that's how you're not supposed to work. But my advice to you always is, remember, just a very concrete game. So, but there's something more promising than this. I mean, g4 is still good, but there's something more human. And if you're able to find the answer that the weakest spot in black's position is the f7 pawn, then you're able to formulate that the knight on g5 protects the pawn on f7. It needs to go. You play h4, move the pawns in front of the king. You take it. Now you gain this tempo, rook e1, bishop f5. The pawn on h4 is hit, but it doesn't really matter. Black needs one move to complete development, and yet he doesn't have it. And you know why? Because you have knight f7. Like, a very cool shot. The point is, if he takes it, and he has to take it, you play d6, and black is just totally smashed off the board. Queen d6, you take it. You're about to take the bishop on e7 because it's a pin. Black has to take it with the bishop. Check here. And you see black's final rank is completely tied. There's nothing he can do about it. Bishop f4, bishop c7, you take it f7 whenever you want. Let's say bishop d7, rook d8. There's no moves for black. He's just collapsing here. These pins are totally deadly. And I think this is probably the nastiest line. Rook f8 and the white is just winning. And if he takes with the bishop, there's a very simple capture. Takes, queen d5 check. Hitting the king and the bishop, and there's the h-pawn, h4, h5. And you know, I just love these examples. When you play h4, you create some targets, and at the end, you use the same pawn as the killing blow. Like, I love absolutely this logic. Yeah, so this is the winning idea. And let me show you more. This is, again, quite a recent game that I played against my compatriot, Latvian number 2 Grandmaster, Nikita Meshkov. I believe right now he's number 3, but it doesn't really matter. He's one of the best Latvian Grandmasters. We played it in the Swedish league. It was a very, very interesting game. He played it very aggressive. I'm playing with white, and I'm thinking, okay, so how should I meet black's e4 and f5? It's definitely a very big threat. Clearly, the first move is bishop f5. All of this is super clear. Black plays queen g7. Now, how can I keep the knight on f5? And I think I have to keep it. Because if I do something else, like if I play, I don't know, queen c2. He plays e4. He plays queen g5. Or maybe even knight e7. He hits the bishop on f5. I take it. He wants to play f5. I play knight f5. Takes. I play queen g5. I run away. f5. What is this? Like, now black just develops a killing attack at the king side. He's going to play rook g8, g4, and that's it. I'm toast. So clearly I need to do something very, very dramatic. I took on c8. I need to control the f5 square. I play knight f5. If he plays queen g6, the other knight comes to help. So this is kind of success. Rook e3, rook g3. I don't need a pawn play for the moment. But he plays queen e7. Now, what should we do? The knight is hit. Logically, you would think that, oh, I got to play knight h4. Makes kind of sense. Black's going to play rook g8. Black's going to play rook g5. Let's say something like this. This. Now we walk back. Black's going to go here. Again, e4, f5, and I don't like this position at all. It looks very, very dangerous. The same applies also for knight g3, e4, f5. Black is totally crushing. So clearly we have to keep the knight at f5. And this is once again where the pawn play comes into force. We play g4, which looks totally ridiculous. Like, we are exposing our king on g1. And the center is pretty open. Black can attempt in a given moment, play e takes on d4, but it's far more important to keep the knight on 5. Nikita played rook g8 with a threat to take on a5. I walked away. He played h5. And here I made a mistake. I played knight h2, and it was quite difficult to pick up this strongest continuation, knight h4, that in this position you can sacrifice a pawn, because it involves quite a bit of geometry, that you have to play f3 and rook h2, which is something I did not see from afar. Now, black, who was the hunter, become the hunted. I play queen d3, I play rook g1, and I have a killing attack. And the line still continues. I'm not really going to show you, but if you have, again, such a thought process that will never, ever touch the pawns in front of the king, there's no way you can make the right choice in this position, because you simply have to. You have to play g4 here. Otherwise, you're immediately, you're going to collapse. Let me show you another one. Yeah, this was, by the way, a pretty cool game. I played several years ago against an international master, Ruben Domingo Nunes. By the way, his brother organizes a very nice open tournament in Granada, Spain. If you ever are looking for a nice tournament, I think it's usually in July. Go check it out. You have my recommendations. I was playing with white. And yeah, this is basically mirroring the position I talked about in the very, very beginning of the bootcamp. Both players have the pros and cons. White has the lead in development. White wants to grab the space. Black is relying on the bishop power, right? So we play c3, h3, f5. Black tries to initiate some play. We play d3. And now let me show you this position from the black's perspective. So black is to move. What's the most natural move in this position, you would think? It's probably some sort of a d6, right? This is how you have to play. You have to play, right? White's going to play bishop f4, probably to fight for the e5 square, something like rook b8, I don't know, queen c2. I don't know where the bishop goes, really, no idea. Something like bishop h6, maybe e6 at some point is a problem. White plays knight e2. White actually is quite happy with this position. So we play as we are supposed to play, and White is quite happy. But check out what Ruben did. He plays h6. Like, okay, what's the big deal? I play knight a3. He plays g5. Suddenly he goes aggressive by the king's side. And it's a highly provocative move. The threat is to win a pawn with g4 and take the pawn on e5. Am I supposed to play d4? Organize a flank attack with a counter-strike in the center? Is this the right moment? Because in these positions, black can afford to play e6, h5, g4. Sometimes sacrifice the pawn, put the bishop on b7, and white's in trouble very quickly. There's a lot of famous games with this line. So I play knight c4, and he plays d5. And here the question is how to proceed. Because I want to take on d6 to generate some counterplay. But if I do this, I increase the power of the bishops. If I go back, let's say I go knight e2. Black plays queen e8. I win a pawn. But do you like this position? Knight c5 f4? I do not. I don't like this at all. Like, it looks like black has all the fun, even though engine slightly prefers white at this position, which is, to be honest, insane. And yeah, I ended up playing e takes on d6. Look for the counterplay with d4. Like, I'm playing as I'm supposed to play, and here comes g4. Black is using very aggressively the pawns in front of the king that are supposed to shelter him. And because of this, he's getting privileges. So g4, takes, knight h2, takes, h5. Crazy, right? So black just played h6, g5, f5, g4, h5. And he's much better. Because you see, these two minor pieces, they shelter the king. The black king is very safe. And it's really about the space advantage that black enjoys. The bishop on g7 is a monster. The bishop on c8 is a beast. Black's about to play bishop e6, bishop d5, and here if he would have played queen f6, knight g3, h4, I think he would have won the game, probably. I was completely outplayed. And yeah, what he did is he slightly misplayed it. He gifted me a tempo, and I was able, because of this, to save the game ultimately. It was a crazy, crazy game. But again, I was super impressed by his idea to play h6, g5. And I felt like I should be, somehow from the wise perspective, I should be punishing this. But if you ask me, like, exactly how, it was not very clear, to be honest. And I think there was this engine line. I forgot to show you. Yeah, this was the engine line. This is how you were supposed to play. d4, takes. Okay, black can play e6, of course. But let's say black plays 4 here, d5, the top continuation according to an engine, to go for this h5, g4 attack at the king side. Takes, rook c1, what is slightly better? Well, it takes quite a bit of nerves to get here, because black's initiative at the king side looks pretty scary, but according to the engine, you cannot be checkmated by a couple of pawns. But I'm not really afraid of those pawns, but I'm afraid that I'm missing the last square bishop. That black can put it somewhere on d5 if he can, or maybe bishop b7 and play c5 at the right moment, and this bishop is going to be a monster. But again, you know, as they say, assumption is the mother of all screw-ups, right? So we tend to assume a lot, and we, even GMs, we tend to forget that chess is a very concrete game. Let me show you maybe a couple of more. Let me see which example it is. Yeah, maybe I could show you one more final example against Alexei Shirov, who has been many years a very uncomfortable opponent for me. Like, I have such a terrible score against him because I just have no idea how to play against him. When I'm playing positionally, he is outplaying me. He's a fantastic positional player. When I'm playing tactically, he's just a better player. So I don't know how to play against him. And ultimately, we played this game a couple of years ago. It was a rapid game. I was following my advice from the Sicilian Khan lifetime repertoires on Chessable, together that we wrote with my good friend Grams Igor Kovalenko, where we came up with this concept to play knight c6, knight e5, knight g6. And the idea is to play h5. But this is kind of risky, but there's a very concrete idea. Black wants to play h4. Black wants to play bishop d6, which is a bit not characteristic to the classical hedgehog. Because in the classical hedgehog, what do we have? We have d6, we have knight e7, we have bishop e7, we have shoot castle. I have a separate hedgehog bootcamp, by the way. You can go and check it out. I think I forgot to mention this as part of the pawn structure bootcamp. So I have Kaspad, Marozzi, with IQP versus IQP. I have hedgehog, and that's it, basically. Yeah, the pawn endgame bootcamps, etc. And even here, one of the most best ideas for black is to play, can you imagine this? h5, h4. So we basically try to improve this idea. We start with this risky move, knight e5, knight c6, and the thing is, now the pawn on b6 is kind of loose because the black knight on d7 doesn't defend the pawn on b6. And now there's a lot of interesting properties. So we are still using the pawns in front of the king, and with the dark square bishop on d6, it just generates some very interesting dynamics. Yeah, so this is how the game progressed. h4, it's not so easy for white to play because you can't play a4, the pawn is hit. He tried to improve the idea. Now I play knight h5, there's no more a4. And once he goes back to this idea, now I play knight e5. I allow him to play f4, I take on d3, and now I go back to f6 and get to this weak pawn, followed by h3, g3, and suddenly there's this very weakened long diagonal. I'm not going to show you the entire game. I just wanted to show you this as a final example. You can go check it out. Whichever video was this, I already forgot. There was this thumbnail where me and Shirov were playing against each other. Actually, the picture, I think it comes from the 50 Grand Swiss. I won the game, by the way. My only victory against Shirov. All right, so this is going to be the end of the theoretical part. And let's maybe try to summarize what we learned. In a nutshell, I do believe that pawn play is very critical for you because if you learn how to master it, then you know where to position your pieces and like try not to make the so-called checkmark moves. I put a piece on a square and I have no idea why I put it there. That's why if you use the pawn play as early as possible, you're going to have this information where your pieces belong. Remember, pawns do not go back. There is no rule that says that you have to make a break in the center. I think that you have to take the breaks with a lot of care. It's a very big decision, and this is yet something I'm seeing happening so many times, especially at the kids level. They love to make the breaks just because it's a possibility, but it just doesn't feel to be a very controlled action. Remember that when you're pushing the pawns quite far, they can become overextended, and the further they go, they leave weaknesses behind, meaning weak squares. So do this with a great care. Um, what else? I have separate boot camps, as I already said in the very beginning, and I just repeated it. I have basically the pawn play is not really about how to use it in the middle game. So I categorize it. What was it again? The parts. It was to push in the center or go for a flank attack. Should we um, use how should we use the pawns in front of the king when the center is locked, when the center is not locked? I show you some basic examples, but obviously there's also a big part of the pawn play is the structures, and it's not part of this bootcamp because I feel it's just gonna go away from the topic, and I'm devoting separate bootcamps on it. So once again, the pawn structures are very very important elements that you should do. So if you have not yet done it, watch my bootcamps on the Morozzi bind, on the Kalaspad, on the IQP. Absolutely super super important topics. I am gonna make at some point a hanging pawns, which is gonna derive from several openings, and also the pawn endgames is a very big part of the pawn play. Probably I could also make a separate bootcamp to reinforce your knowledge on the pawn play prophylactic chess, like how to make small prophylactic improvements, small moves also with the pawns. So I felt like it has no place in today's bootcamp, but at least I'm hoping that you're gonna have a bit better understanding of the pawn play in general. All right, that's basically it. So if you have any questions, leave a comment. Definitely, I will appreciate any comment, any insight you have. Also, I would like to remind you this is like a common rule, not only for this video, because this video is going to stay on for years. Like I just recorded it, but it's going to stay on for years. On my boot camps, they tend to become popular over years and even not immediately. I would really appreciate that if you like my content, within the first 7 days, there is this hype button, which is available only on mobile phones. So for the first 7 days, you can press a hype button for a video, and you can do it 3 times a week, once a day. So every hype button allows my videos to be more discovered, and this allows me to grow more as a content creator, get more views, get more subscribers, and get more bootcamps. That's how it goes, right? So that's why it's also, I think, in everyone's best interest. It's in my best interest that I keep growing and I can make more bootcamps. And ultimately, my goal for the bootcamps, I think the next episode, number 50, probably is going to be on the Queen's Gambit Decline, because that was the second most popular option selected in the poll. So thank you everyone who voted for it. And the goal I have is to make 100 episodes. This is something I decided some time ago. At least I hope it's going to be of some it's going to leave some sort of a legacy, because I don't think there's anybody else, a YouTuber, who's making so big, long videos. Obviously, there's a lot of educational videos available on YouTube, many great educational channels, but I don't know if there's anyone who's making 3-hour long videos and has like 50 episodes. I'm probably the only crazy one. All right, so thank you for watching this, for your patience. Thank you for your positive feedback. I hope there's going to be some good comments, and keep studying also the other bootcamps. So I'm going to leave some links in the description, and, have a great day.